The woman had the nerve to smile at me over my daughter's casket. Not a grief smile. Not the kind people wear when they don't know what else to do with their faces. This was something else entirely. Controlled, deliberate, the smile of a woman who believed she had already won something. My name is Jessamine Collier. I am 63 years old. I have buried a husband, survived a stroke, and raised a daughter who became everything I prayed she would be. But nothing, not one single thing in 6 decades of living, prepared me for what happened inside that funeral home on the morning we said goodbye to my Vashti. I want you to stay with me for this, because before we're done, every piece of what happened in that room will finally sit where it belongs. If you're watching this, drop a comment and tell me where you're from. I want to know who's sitting with me today. The room was full. Vashti was loved, and people came to say so. Mirabelle, my granddaughter, 5 years old and dressed in white because she had refused every black thing I put in front of her, was pressed against my chest. One small fist wrapped in the collar of my blouse. She had been calm all morning in the way children are calm when they don't fully understand what is happening around them. As far as Mirabelle knew, her mother was at Grandma's farmhouse. I will explain that later. Right now, I need you to stay in this room with me. Lavinia Morrow arrived 40 minutes into the service. She was dressed in a way that had nothing to do with mourning. Fitted, deliberate, every detail considered. She moved through the room with practiced sorrow, touching arms, accepting embraces, performing grief with the precision of a woman who had rehearsed it. I watched her from across the room. I had been watching her since the moment she walked through that door. She made her way to me slowly. That should have been my first warning, that she came to me at all. She leaned close under the cover of offering condolences, close enough that I could smell her perfume, and she whispered 4 words that I will never forget for the rest of my life. Cry more, old lady. Then she pulled back just enough to look at me and added, quietly, with absolute certainty, I'll spend her millions better than she ever did. My body went cold from the inside out. Before I could find a single word, before my mind could locate a response inside the shock of what she had just said to me, Mirabelle shifted against my chest. She lifted her head, and in the clear, certain voice of a child who has no reason to doubt what she believes, she said, Mummy's not dead. Mummy's at Grandma's farmhouse. The color left Lavinia Morrow's face so completely and so quickly that I watched it happen like something physical. She did not know what she had walked into. She did not know whether Vashti was dead or alive. She did not know whether this was a trap, a setup, or a miracle she had not accounted for. And I looked at that pale, shaking, calculating face. And I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that starts somewhere below your grief and comes up without your permission. I laughed because my daughter was already lying in that casket. Had been for 3 days. There was no farmhouse. There was no coming back. And the woman standing in front of me, the woman who had whispered about millions over a dead woman's body, had just been undone by a 5-year-old who still believed her mother was alive. Lavinia Morrow had walked into that funeral home with a plan. She left it not knowing what had just happened to her. And neither did I. Not yet. I need to tell you who Vashti was before I tell you what happened to her. Not because I want your sympathy, though Lord knows grief has a way of asking for things you never meant to request. I need to tell you, because what comes later will only mean something if you understand exactly who was lost. Vashti Collier was 34 years old when she died. She was precise, quietly ambitious, and constitutionally incapable of doing anything halfway. From the time she was a little girl, she approached everything: school, relationships, money, motherhood, with a kind of focused deliberateness that made people around her feel both steadied and slightly outpaced. She built her first business at 26, a logistics company that people told her was too competitive a space for someone without industry connections. She did not argue with them. She simply went ahead and built it anyway. What started with 2 delivery contracts and a rented warehouse space grew faster than even I understood at the time. By the time she was 30, she had regional distribution agreements across 3 states and enough recurring commercial clients that she opened a second operation. A supply chain consulting firm that served mid-sized companies who could not afford the large agencies but needed that level of expertise. She understood money the way some people understand music, instinctively, structurally, hearing things others missed. But she never performed it. That was the thing about Vashti. She did not wear her success. She carried it quietly, and that quietness made people underestimate her constantly. She let them. She said once that being underestimated was the most useful business advantage she had ever discovered. Our relationship was the kind that takes years to build correctly. When she was young, I was her mother. Authority, rules, boundaries. But somewhere in her late 20s, we shifted into something more equal. She would call me on Tuesday evenings just to talk. Not about anything urgent. Just to talk. Those Tuesday calls were the architecture of my week for 7 years. She loved Mirabelle with a completeness that was almost frightening to witness. Every decision she made, financial, professional, personal, she measured against what it meant for that child's future. Vashti did not believe in leaving things to chance or to the goodwill of people who might not deserve that goodwill. Which is why she had a lawyer she trusted completely. Why she had a will drafted before Mirabelle's 2nd birthday. Why she had structured a trust in her daughter's name that was specific, protected, and entirely separate from anything connected to her marriage. She told me once, sitting right here at my kitchen table, cup of tea going cold beside her, that wealth without protection was just money waiting to be taken by whoever was standing closest when something went wrong. I did not know the full details of what she had put in place. She was private about the specifics the way thorough people sometimes are, not secretive, just contained. But I knew it existed. I knew because Vashti did not leave things unprotected. It was not in her nature. The last time I saw her truly at ease, before everything, was a Sunday afternoon at this same table. Mirabelle was outside. The light was coming through the window the way it does in early autumn, that particular gold that makes everything look preserved. Vashti was laughing at something I had said. I cannot even remember what. And for that one moment there was nothing complicated in her face. Just her. Just my daughter, laughing in my kitchen like she had all the time in the world. She did not have all the time in the world. None of us knew that then. Lavinia Morrow had been in my daughter's life for 6 years. 6 years is long enough to know someone's habits, long enough to understand how their marriage breathes, long enough to learn which doors are unlocked and which ones only look that way. Lavinia understood all of it, and I did not see it clearly until it was too late to matter. They met through a professional network. Vashti mentioned her casually at first, a contact who had become a lunch companion, then a regular presence, then someone who appeared at birthday dinners and holiday gatherings, and quiet Sunday afternoons, without anyone quite tracking how that progression happened. That is the particular skill of certain women. They do not force their way into a life. They simply keep appearing until their presence feels inevitable. I notice things. Small things I filed away without examining too closely because I trusted my daughter's judgment, and because nothing I observed was large enough to name directly. Lavinia asked questions that were 1 degree too specific. Not nosy questions. She was far too careful for that, but precise ones. She once asked Vashti, in my presence, how her accountant structured her quarterly distributions. She framed it as curiosity, as admiration even. Vashti answered without hesitation because she had no reason not to. I watched Lavinia receive that information and I noticed, just barely, that she did not ask a follow-up question. She did not need one. She had what she came for. There were other moments. A comment about Chadwick's work schedule. That was more detailed than a friend should have been able to make. A reference to a disagreement between Vashti and her business partner that Vashti had mentioned to me once, privately, and that I had not repeated to anyone. When Lavinia referenced it at a dinner, lightly, almost in passing, I felt something move through me that I did not immediately identify. I identified it now. It was warning. Chadwick Langford, my son-in-law. I never fully trusted him and I never fully condemned him. He was the kind of man whose weakness announced itself in small ways that he worked constantly to conceal. At family gatherings, he sometimes looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with work, a specific exhaustion that comes from managing something you cannot put down. He was distracted by his phone in ways he tried to make look casual. Once, at a dinner I hosted at the farmhouse, he excused himself 3 times. He came back each time slightly more composed than he should have needed to be for a simple bathroom break. I noticed. I said nothing. I told myself it was not my marriage. What I understand now is that Lavinia had positioned herself perfectly between both of them. She used Vashti's trust to access Chadwick. And through Chadwick, she gained access to everything surrounding my daughter's life. The routines, the finances, the vulnerabilities, the fractures that had not yet widened enough for outsiders to see clearly. Looking back now, it is hard not to see intention in the way she moved through all of it. The last time Vashti visited the farmhouse, she said something I have been turning over in my mind every day since. We were sitting at the kitchen table. She was speaking carefully, the way she did when she was managing how much she revealed. She said, quietly, almost to herself, "She knows things she should not know, and I do not understand how." I asked her who she meant. She looked at her tea. She did not answer. I let it go. I will never stop wishing I had not. She arrived on a Saturday afternoon with Mirabelle on her hip and something heavy behind her eyes. I saw it the moment she stepped out of the car. Vashti was good at composure. She had practiced it her whole adult life, but I was her mother. I knew the difference between her rested face and her managed face. That Saturday, she was managing something she had not yet found the words for. Mirabelle hit the ground running. That child had a relationship with this farmhouse that defied explanation. The moment her feet touched the grass, she belonged to the land, and not to any of us. Vashti watched her go with a smile that did not quite reach the rest of her face. Then she followed me inside. I made tea. She sat at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the mug, the way she did when she needed the warmth of something solid. I did not rush her. I have learned over 63 years that rushing a woman toward the thing she is not ready to say only pushes it further down. She started carefully, the way daughters do when they are protecting their mothers from the full weight of something. She said Lavinia had been making things difficult. She did not elaborate on that immediately. She moved past it quickly, the way you step around something on the floor in the dark. She said she had found messages on Chadwick's phone. She did not tell me exactly what they said. She said only that she had tried to read them charitably and could not, that she had tried every reasonable interpretation available to her, and each one led back to the same place. She said she felt like she was losing her mind, that everyone around her, mutual friends, colleagues, even Chadwick himself, reflected her marriage back to her as something whole and functioning. But she was standing inside it. She knew what it felt like from the inside, and from the inside, it was hollow. Then she said the thing that has stayed with me every day since. She said she did not want Mirabelle growing up between two houses. I heard that, and I made my decision before she finished the sentence. I told her to stay. I told her that walking away was what the other woman wanted, and that she should not give anyone the satisfaction of watching her leave what she had built. I told her that marriages go through fractures, and that fractures could be repaired if both people chose to repair them. I told her Mirabelle needed her home intact. She listened to everything I said. She nodded. She finished her tea. Outside, the sky had started turning the particular dull gray that settles over the county before rain. I remember telling her to take the highway instead of the back road, because the curves get slick out there when the weather shifts. She said she would. She called Mirabelle in from the back field, and she held her daughter's hand all the way to the car. She turned once at the door and looked at me, just looked, without saying anything. And then she got in and drove away. I stood on the porch until the car disappeared around the bend in the road. 4 hours later, my phone rang. Vashti never made it home. The car came off the road 11 miles from this farmhouse on a narrow stretch where the pavement dips hard near the shoulder after heavy rain. When investigators filed their report, they noted weather conditions, delayed braking marks, and evidence that she appeared distracted in the seconds before the impact. Distracted. I have turned that word over in my hands every single day since, because I know what she was carrying when she left this porch. I put some of it there myself. I told her to go back. I told her to stay, and I have never forgiven myself for it. I was folding laundry when the phone rang. That is the detail that stays with me. Not because it matters, it does not matter at all, but because the mind does something cruel when it loses someone. It preserves the ordinary moment just before. The laundry, the late afternoon light coming through the bedroom window, the specific quiet of the farmhouse at that hour. I have not been able to fold laundry since without my hands remembering what came next. The voice on the phone was calm in the practiced way of people whose job requires them to deliver the worst news of your life without breaking. They said there had been an accident. They said 11 miles from my property on the county road. They said Vashti had been transported to Mercy General in critical condition and that I should come immediately and ask for the charge nurse on the 3rd floor. They did not say she was gone, not on the phone. By the time I arrived, she already was, but they save that conversation for when they can see your face. I drove to that hospital with both hands on the wheel and my mind completely blank. Not numb, blank. There is a difference. Numb implies you are feeling something and pushing it down. I was not feeling anything yet. My body was simply executing the necessary steps. Drive, park, walk through the entrance, ask for the 3rd floor. I found Chadwick in the waiting area before I found any nurse. I had prepared myself to be angry at him on that drive. I had 40 minutes of highway, and I had spent most of it building the specific anger of a mother who has always had reservations about her son-in-law, and now had a reason to voice them. I walked into that waiting room ready. He was sitting in a plastic chair against the far wall with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. When he heard me and looked up, I saw something that dissolved every word I had prepared. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the center. Whatever had lived inside Chadwick Langford that gave him his shape, his confidence, his composure, his carefully managed presentation of himself, it was gone. Just gone. I could not hate him in that moment. I wanted to. I tried. I could not. The doctor used the words they use: clean, clinical, final, severe impact trauma. They did everything they could. She did not survive her injuries. I heard the sentences and stored them somewhere I have not fully opened since. We left together, separately, but at the same time. and drove back to the house where my daughter had lived. Mirabel was with a neighbor. Chadwick collected her. I followed in my own car. That night, after dinner that neither of us ate, Mirabel looked up from the sitting room floor where she had been drawing and asked where her mummy was. Chadwick opened his mouth. I watched his face search for the word and fail to find it. I watched him look at this child. Vashti's eyes set exactly in Vashti's face, and I watched him reach for something he could not touch. He said Mummy had to stay somewhere tonight. Mirabel asked where. He said at Grandma's farmhouse. I said nothing. I could not correct him because I could not say the word either. The farmhouse was the last safe place Vashti had been. It was the only geography that made sense in a world that had stopped making sense 4 hours ago. So, we let it stand. Mirabel accepted it completely and went back to her drawing. She fell asleep on my lap 2 hours later. I sat in that chair and held her and understood that we had just handed this child something we did not know how to take back. The farmhouse held, and neither of us was strong enough that night to be sorry about that. I moved into Vashti's house the morning after the hospital. I did not ask permission. I packed a bag, drove back across town, and let myself in with the key my daughter had given me 3 years prior for emergencies. I decided this qualified. Grief, when you are my age, does not look the way younger people expect it to. It does not collapse. It does not wail. It finds the nearest task and it holds on. So I cooked, I cleaned, I answered the door when people came with food and condolences, and the particular discomfort of not knowing what to say. I managed the logistics of death the way women of my generation have always managed the things that hurt most, by keeping my hands moving, so my mind had somewhere to be. At night, Mirabel woke up asking for her mother. Every time it happened, I held her and said, Mummy is resting. I told myself each morning that today I would find the right words, the real ones. I told myself I would sit her down and explain in language a 5-year-old could hold. And every morning the words stayed out of reach. So Mummy is resting held. It was not a lie I was proud of. It was the only thing standing between that child and something she was not yet built to carry. Lavinia Morrow appeared on the second day. She arrived with food, a proper arrangement, not something thrown together, and an expression of grief so well constructed. I might have believed it if I had not already been watching her for 6 years. She moved through that house with an efficiency that had nothing to do with mourning. Mourning is slow and uncertain. Lavinia was neither. I watched her run her hand along the kitchen counter the way you touch something you are already imagining rearranged. I watched her pause in the doorway of Vashti's home office, just a beat longer than curiosity required, and look into that room the way a person looks at something they are calculating the value of. I watched her sit close to Chadwick on the sofa, her body angled toward him in a way that communicated a familiarity she had no business displaying in his dead wife's living room. Chadwick accepted her presence in ways that turned my stomach, not because I had proof of anything specific, but I have lived 63 years inside human behavior, and I know what people look like when they share history they have not disclosed. There was an ease between them that did not belong to friendship, a shorthand, a comfort that had been built somewhere private. I said nothing. I was not ready. And I had learned enough in my life to know that a woman who moves before she is ready loses the advantage entirely. But I kept watching. She asked about Vashti's business arrangements twice within 3 days, both times wrapped inside practical questions. Who handles the accounts? Who should be notified? Who manages the contracts while things are being sorted? Reasonable questions on the surface. I noticed she asked them when Chadwick was within earshot. On the 4th day, she asked, carefully, gently, framed as concern, whether anyone had located Vashti's will yet. I looked at her when she asked that. She held my gaze for exactly 1 second, and then looked away. That evening, I stood at the front window and watched her walk to her car. I watched her drive away, and I understood, not as suspicion, not as worry, but as the cold, settled certainty of a woman who has finally named what she has been looking at, that Lavinia Morrow had not come here to mourn my daughter. She had come because she believed the funeral was where everything she wanted would finally begin. I did not fight her. I understood, in the way you understand things that cannot be explained cleanly, that her refusal was not stubbornness. It was faith. She was dressed in white because she did not believe this day was what the rest of us knew it to be. Fighting that faith felt like a cruelty I was not capable of adding to the mourning. I braided her hair at the bathroom mirror the way Vashti used to. 2 plaits, pulled back, neat, a white ribbon at each end. My hands have braided hair for 40 years. They knew what to do even when the rest of me did not. I focused on keeping them steady. That was the only goal I gave myself for the first hour of that morning. Steady hands. The funeral home smelled of flowers and climate control, and the particular stillness that grief produces in public spaces. People arrived in their good clothes, carrying their carefully managed faces, the pressed suits, the dark dresses, the expressions calibrated somewhere between sorrow and composure. 200 people came to say goodbye to my daughter. She had earned every single one of them. I was not grieving the way I had been grieving for the past several days. Something had shifted. I could feel it in the way I moved through that room. Slower, more deliberate, more aware of where everyone was standing and why. The acute part of grief, the part that sits on your chest and makes breathing a conscious effort, had retreated somewhere. What replaced it was colder, quieter, more directed. I positioned myself near the center of the room where I could see the entrance clearly. I want to be honest with you about that. I was not simply receiving condolences. I was watching. Because I had spent 6 days in my daughter's house observing Lavinia Morrow move through rooms she was already mentally measuring. And I knew, with the certainty that settles into a person after enough small observations line up correctly, that she would be here. She arrived 40 minutes into the service. I tracked her from the entrance, overdressed, composed, moving through that room with the practiced sorrow I had watched her perform in Vashti's living room all week. I watched her read the space, who was standing where Chadwick was positioned, where the sight lines opened up. I expected her to move toward Chadwick, to use the occasion to establish proximity publicly, to perform the role of devoted friend near the widower in a room full of witnesses. She did not move toward Chadwick. She moved toward me. I did not anticipate that. I want to be precise about this, because it matters. I had prepared for her to make a move. I had not prepared for her to make that particular move. There is a distance between those two things that I underestimated completely. The room had music playing low, something instrumental, something chosen to fill the silence without demanding attention. 200 people producing the ambient murmur of managed grief. Enough sound that a whisper between 2 women went nowhere beyond the 2 women. She leaned close, and she said what she said. What happened next? You already know. Mirabelle's voice, the color leaving Lavinia's face, the laugh that came up from somewhere I did not know I still had. I laughed because my daughter was already in that casket, had been for 3 days, and the woman standing in front of me was unraveling over a ghost. A ghost she had helped create. What happened after the laugh is where this story truly begins. The laugh confused people. I could feel it move through the room the way a wrong note moves through a quiet song. Everyone heard it, Nobody knew what to do with it. Lavinia Morrow took one small step backward. Her face had not recovered its color. She was still processing. I could see it in her eyes, that rapid internal calculation of a woman trying to determine whether she had walked into something she had not prepared for. She did not speak. She did not move toward anyone. She simply stood there, recalculating, while 200 people pretended not to have noticed what had just happened between us. I did not look at her again. I shifted Mirabelle in my arms, and I made a decision I had been postponing for 8 days. I lowered myself to my granddaughter's level, right there, in that room, in front of every person who had come to say goodbye to my daughter. And I looked at her face, that small, certain, waiting face. She was still looking at the space where Lavinia had been standing, as though the woman's reaction had introduced a question Mirabelle did not yet have the language to ask. I took both her hands in mine. I told her Mummy was not at the farmhouse anymore. I told her Mummy had gone somewhere much further than that. Somewhere warm and without pain, I said. Because she was 5 years old and some distances need to be described in language a child can hold without breaking. I told her Mummy was not coming back. Her face did something I have never been able to describe adequately to anyone who asks. It moved through confusion first, a slight tightening around the eyes, then searching, looking at my face the way children look when they are hoping the adult in front of them is wrong and the evidence might be visible somewhere in their expression. Then something settled. Something shifted behind her eyes that had no name in any adult language I have ever had access to. It was not crying. It was not understanding. It was something that lived between those two things. I held her through it. I did not cry. I could not afford to yet. The funeral continued around us. I was not present for most of it. Afterward, when the room had emptied and the cars had pulled away and Chadwick had driven us back to the house in a silence that none of us tried to fill, I made 2 decisions before I had even removed my shoes. The first was custody. I hated myself a little for thinking about it that night. A man had lost his wife less than 24 hours earlier, and already part of my mind was moving toward paperwork and legal structures and what Mirabelle's future needed to look like. But grief does not suspend danger. And I had spent the past week watching a woman move through my daughter's house, like she was already measuring where everything would go. I was not going to debate custody or delay it or wait to see how things settled. Mirabelle was mine to protect, and I intended to make that legal and permanent. The second decision was the phone. Chadwick was sitting in the living room when I came downstairs. He had not turned a light on. The room was dark, except for the gray coming through the curtains, and he was sitting inside it, like a man who had forgotten that switches existed. I told him I needed Vashti's phone. I said there were people who needed to be notified, and I did not have the strength to explain to strangers what had happened. I said it simply because it was partly true and because a man sitting alone in the dark does not interrogate simple requests. He reached into his jacket pocket without looking up and held it out to me. I took it upstairs. I sat on the edge of the guest bed and held it in both hands without opening it. I was preparing myself, because I already knew, in the way mothers know the things their daughters could not finish saying, that what was on this phone was going to change the shape of everything that came next. I opened it at 11:30 that night when the house had finally gone quiet. I started from the beginning. Not from the most recent messages, from the very first ones. Because I needed to understand the full shape of what had happened to my daughter, and shapes only reveal themselves when you trace them from the start. The early messages between Vashti and Lavinia read exactly as you would expect, from 2 women who considered themselves friends. Easy conversation. Plans made and canceled. The ordinary texture of a functioning friendship. I read through months of it and found nothing that alarmed me. Then the texture changed. It happened gradually, which I understood immediately was intentional. Lavinia was too deliberate a woman to be careless about pacing. The cutting remarks began arriving embedded inside concern. A comment about Chadwick that was framed as worry but landed as destabilization. An observation about Vashti's business that was phrased as admiration but contained something sharper underneath. Each message individually could be explained away. Read together across months, they formed a pattern as clear as anything I had ever seen. Lavinia was not trying to end my daughter's marriage. That realization stopped me completely. I had assumed, in the way people assume the obvious, that the goal was to push Vashti out so she could step in. But that was not what these messages were doing. They were designed to keep Vashti inside the marriage while keeping her destabilized, anxious, questioning her own perception, dependent on the one friend who always seemed to have information nobody else had. She wanted access. The marriage was the door. Vashti's trust was the key, and Chadwick's weakness was the lever she used to keep the whole structure under her control. I read Vashti's responses with my hand pressed flat against my chest. My daughter tried. For months, she tried to make sense of what she was receiving. She asked careful questions. She gave reasonable explanations. She defended Chadwick in language that became shorter and less certain the further I read. And then she stopped defending him altogether. She simply started responding less, pulling back in small increments, the way a person pulls back from a heat source they cannot name, but can feel. The last message Lavinia sent was dated the morning Vashti drove to my farmhouse. I read it twice. I will not put its full contents here because some things need to be presented in the right room to the right people before they become part of any record. But I will tell you this. Whoever sent that message knew exactly what they were doing. They knew the state Vashti was already in. They knew what that information would do to her at that particular moment on that particular morning. My daughter drove to me carrying that message. She sat at my kitchen table and talked around the edges of it because she could not say the full thing out loud. And then she drove home. 11 miles. The investigators used the word distracted. I had turned that word over for weeks, not fully understanding its weight. I understood it now. I understood exactly what had been sitting in her mind on that road. I could not prove that message caused the accident. I knew that. Courts require more than grief and suspicion and a mother's certainty. But I also knew emotional pressure leaves damage long before anyone decides whether that damage qualifies legally. And I had evidence of something. Sustained, documented, deliberate harassment across 14 months. I put the phone down. Then I picked it up again and dialed my lawyer, Raymond Holt. He answered on the second ring. I said, I need to speak with someone who handles criminal cases. I have documented evidence of sustained harassment and possible extortion, and I believe the emotional pressure surrounding it contributed to my daughter's state of mind before the accident. Can you help me or refer me to someone who can? He said he could help. I said good. I told him I would be there in the morning. Then I set the phone down on the nightstand beside me, both phones, and sat in the dark until my eyes adjusted to what the rest of this was going to require of me. I placed Vashti's phone on the table between us and sat down. I did not raise my voice. I did not open with an accusation. I had spent 63 years watching women destroy their own leverage by leading with emotion, and I was not going to make that mistake in the most important conversation of what remained of my life. I simply turned the phone to face him and let him read. Chadwick looked at the screen. The first thing that moved across his face was denial, fast and reflexive. The expression of a man whose body has been practicing concealment for so long, it responds before the mind gives permission. Then recognition arrived. Then something that had no name I could identify. A collapse that moved inward rather than outward, like a structure failing from its center. He sat back in his chair. He told me everything. Lavinia had pursued him over a period of months, persistent, strategic, patient, in the way she was patient about everything she wanted. He fell. He used the word weakness, and I did not correct him because it was the accurate word, and I was not there to help him feel better about his vocabulary. He told himself it was temporary, that it meant nothing. He kept telling himself that right up until it meant everything, and by then, the telling had become a habit he no longer examined. When he ended it, she did not accept the ending. She began sending him things, details about his financial arrangements that she had gathered during her access to Vashti's life, conversations she had recorded without his knowledge, information that would have dismantled everything he had spent years constructing. She told him plainly that if he did not cooperate, she would take what she had directly to his wife. He paid her 6 payments over 14 months, each one offered with the private conviction that it was the last one. Each one followed by a period of quiet that ended when the next demand arrived. He had told himself, and I could hear in the way he said it exactly how many times he had repeated this to himself, that he was protecting his marriage. That if Vashti never found out, the damage was contained. That manageable was the same thing as resolved. He had no idea she already knew. When I told him, when I said that Vashti had driven to my farmhouse on the day she died to ask her mother what to do about her marriage, something happened to Chadwick Langford that I had not anticipated and could not look away from. It moved through him like something physical. He understood, in real time and in front of me, that his wife had carried his failure alone, that she had driven 40 minutes to sit in her mother's kitchen and speak carefully around the full truth of what he had put her through, that she had driven home from that kitchen carrying all of it, his weakness, Lavinia's cruelty, my advice to stay, 11 miles down a road she never finished. I watched him understand this. I did not reach across the table. I did not soften what he was sitting inside. He had earned every second of it. When he had been quiet long enough, I told him what I needed. Every payment record, every message, every piece of documentation he had been holding. All of it turned over completely. In exchange, I would not pursue his destruction beyond what the facts required. Mirabelle would know her father. He would have his visiting days, and I would never once speak against him to that child, because she had already lost enough without losing her image of him too. But I would never forgive him. He nodded. There was nothing left to say, and we both understood that. Raymond Holt was the kind of lawyer who listened more than he spoke. In my experience, that is the rarest and most valuable quality a person in his profession can possess. He did not interrupt. He did not redirect. He sat across from me in his office on that first morning and let me lay everything on the table. The phone, the messages, the timeline, the payment records Chadwick had turned over. And he read through all of it with the particular stillness of a man who understands that what he is looking at matters. I was not in a hurry. I want to be clear about that because people who did not know me might have expected urgency, might have expected a grieving mother demanding immediate action and visible results. But I have raised children and run a working farmhouse and survived losses I did not believe I could survive. And what all of that teaches you, if you pay attention, is that patience applied with precision is more dangerous than speed applied with emotion. I was not moving slowly because I lacked conviction. I was moving slowly because I intended to arrive correctly. Raymond was honest with me in the way I needed him to be. He told me that proving legal causation for the accident was not a viable path, that courts operated on evidence of direct action, and that a message sent to a woman who then drove distracted was not a chain any prosecutor could construct into a criminal charge. I told him I understood that. I told him I was not there for the accident. I was there for the 14 months that preceded it, that he could work with. Sustained criminal harassment documented across a 14-month period. Extortion supported by 6 payment records with corresponding messages detailing the demands. 2 charges, both serious. Both built on documentation that Lavinia Morrow herself had generated because she had never once considered that her communications would end up in a lawyer's office. Deliberate people make that mistake sometimes. They are so confident in their control of a situation that they forget situations have edges they cannot see. The custody filing moved through the same period. Chadwick signed without contest. He sat in Raymond's office on the day of the signing and did not look up from the paperwork once. He knew what he was in this moment, and what he was not. He knew his daughter needed a stability he could not honestly claim to provide, and he was not small enough, whatever else he was, to fight that truth for the sake of his own pride. Mirabelle came to the farmhouse the following weekend and helped me plant tomatoes in the back garden. She talked the entire time. I listened to every word. Then Raymond called. A mutual acquaintance, a woman named Gloria Fitch, who had known Vashti through her professional network, had contacted me separately the week prior. She told me Lavinia had been speaking openly in certain circles about Chadwick's intentions, that she had been positioning herself as the next woman in that house, referencing the estate, referencing the businesses, speaking about Mirabelle with a familiarity that turned Gloria's stomach enough to pick up the phone. I filed that information alongside everything else. When Raymond called to tell me Lavinia had retained her own attorney, I was standing at the kitchen sink. I felt something move through me that I did not immediately identify. I stood still and examined it. It was relief, because a woman who retains a lawyer to fight what is coming has already confirmed she knows something is coming. And a woman who knows something is coming has just told me everything I needed to know about her conscience. Lavinia's response came from 3 directions at once. That told me everything I needed to know about her state of mind. A coordinated multi-channel counterattack is not the move of a woman reacting. It is the move of a woman who has been planning her defense since the moment she understood that offense was no longer available to her. She was still thinking strategically. I respected that, even as I watched it fail. The first channel was social. Gloria Fitch called me within 48 hours to report that Lavinia had been working their shared circles with a revised narrative. The story she was telling positioned her as a grieving friend, being persecuted by a controlling and emotionally unstable grandmother who could not accept that her son-in-law had the right to rebuild his life. She described me as bitter, possessive, unable to release the people connected to her daughter. She delivered this narrative with the practiced sorrow I had watched her perform at the funeral. Just enough vulnerability to make the listener feel protective of her. Gloria did not believe a word of it. She told me she was not alone in that. The second channel was legal. Her attorney filed a preliminary motion that characterized Raymond's approach as harassment, which I found almost impressive in its audacity given the specific nature of what we were filing against her. The third channel was Chadwick. She contacted him directly. I learned this from Chadwick himself, who called me the same evening it happened. His voice on the phone was steady in a way I had not heard from him since before any of this began. He told me she had reached out, that she had reminded him, carefully, in the language of a woman who understood how to apply pressure without leaving fingerprints, of what she still held, what she still knew, what she could still do with it if the current situation did not resolve itself in a direction more favorable to her interests. She had reached back for the lever that had moved him for 14 months. It was not there anymore. Chadwick told me he was taking everything to Raymond, not the records he had already provided. Those were done. He meant the contact she had just made, the message she had sent that evening attempting to reactivate leverage against a man who had already surrendered it. He said he wanted it documented. He said it without asking for acknowledgement or gratitude. He simply said it and waited. I told him to send it directly to Raymond's office in the morning. He said he would. What Lavinia had designed as a counter move, a pressure campaign across 3 fronts intended to destabilize our position, had produced the opposite of its intended result. Her social narrative gave Gloria Fitch a reason to provide a formal witness statement. Her legal filing established that she understood the severity of what was coming. And her contact with Chadwick generated a documented record of attempted extortion, so current it was still warm when Raymond received it. She had reached back for her weapon and discovered it had already been handed to the other side. Raymond called that evening to confirm that criminal charges were being filed. Harassment and extortion, both documented, multiple sources. He said it cleanly and without theater because he was that kind of lawyer. I sat with it for a moment at the kitchen table. I looked at the chair across from me, the one Vashti had sat in on that last Saturday, the one where she had wrapped both hands around her mug and chosen her words so carefully. I said her name once, quietly, into the room. Then I got up and started dinner because Mirabelle would be home from school in an hour, and that child was hungry by 5 o'clock every single evening, without exception. The charges became public on a Tuesday morning. I did not watch it unfold in real time. I learned about the specific shape of the public reaction gradually, through Raymond, through Gloria Fitch, through the particular quality of silence that replaced the noise Lavinia had been generating in certain circles for weeks. That silence was its own kind of information. Communities do not go quiet because nothing happened. They go quiet because the story they accepted has been publicly disproven, and nobody wants to be associated with the version they were telling yesterday. Her calls went unreturned. The acquaintances she had used to distribute her narrative about the bitter, unstable grandmother became suddenly unavailable. The social infrastructure she had spent 6 years building inside my daughter's life, the access, the proximity, the carefully maintained image of devoted friendship, collapsed with a speed that told me it had never been as solid as she believed. I attended one proceeding. I want to be precise about why. I did not go to watch her suffer. I went because Vashti could not be there, and someone who loved her needed to be in that room when the evidence was presented. I sat in the 3rd row, and I kept my hands folded in my lap, and I watched. Lavinia's composure did not shatter. I had not expected it to. She was too controlled a woman for shattering. What happened was quieter, and in some ways, more complete. A stillness that went wrong around the edges. A rigidity in her shoulders that was costing her more than it should have. The moment the documented messages appeared on the screen, her own words, her own timestamps, her own carefully constructed language laid out in sequence for a room full of people to read. I watched something leave her face that did not come back. Her lawyer negotiated. Raymond did not give much ground. He had the documentation, the witness statements, the payment records, and the additional contact she had made to Chadwick while charges were already being prepared. He did not need to give ground. He simply needed to stand where he was. She pleaded guilty. Criminal harassment, extortion, both on record. The plea agreement included supervised probation, mandatory counseling, 18 months of community service, a restraining order that covered me, Mirabelle, and the family home, and a civil judgment against her finances that Raymond told me quietly would take her years to satisfy. She did not go to prison. I had prepared myself to feel something about that. I had rehearsed the anger in advance. The particular disappointment of watching a system offer a softer landing than the damage warranted. But when the moment arrived, what I felt was not anger. It was completion. Because her name now carried what she had done. Everywhere she went for the rest of her life, every application, every introduction, every fresh start she attempted, what she did to my daughter's life would be attached to her own. She had wanted Vashti's millions. She had wanted that house and those businesses and that life. Instead, she had a record, court supervision, a judgment, and a restraining order keeping her away from the child she had spoken about as though she already belonged to her. I left the courthouse and drove directly to Mirabelle's school. I signed her out early without explanation. We went for ice cream. She talked from the moment she got in the car to the moment we walked back out. Her teacher, a girl in her class who had said something funny at lunch, a song they had learned that morning that she could not quite remember all the words to. I listened to every single word. This was what I had come for. Everything else, every document, every proceeding, every quiet conversation in Raymond's office had been the road to get here. To this child, to this ice cream, to this ordinary Tuesday afternoon that Vashti would have given anything to sit inside. I listened, and for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Vashti's lawyer was a woman named Constance Webb. She had represented my daughter for 7 years, longer than the marriage, longer than either of the businesses in their current form, longer than almost any professional relationship Vashti had maintained. When I sat across from her in that office for the first time, I understood immediately why. Constance Webb was exactly the kind of lawyer my daughter would have chosen. Precise, unhurried, and constitutionally incapable of softening a fact simply because the fact was uncomfortable. She told me what Vashti had put in place. The will named me executor of the estate. The trust she had established for Mirabelle named me trustee until the child turned 25. These were not documents drafted in crisis or afterthought. Constance told me Vashti had reviewed and updated both within the past 18 months, deliberately, methodically, with the specific intention of ensuring that what she had built could not be redirected by proximity or grief or anyone standing close enough to benefit from confusion. My daughter had known that wealth without protection was just money waiting to be taken. She had made certain that no one could take it. I noticed on the wall, behind Constance's desk, a framed document, the original engagement letter between my daughter and this firm, signed in Vashti's handwriting. I looked at that signature for a moment longer than I intended to. Then I looked back at Constance and told her I was ready to understand everything. She showed me. The scope of what Vashti had built was larger than I had known. Not because she had hidden it, because she was private about specifics in the way thorough people sometimes are. The logistics company had grown consistently for 8 years. The consulting firm had developed a client roster that Constance described as remarkable for a business of its age. There were systems in place, relationships cultivated, operational structures that had been built to function without requiring Vashti's daily presence, because she had thought that far ahead too. I found her everywhere in those businesses. In the annotated documents her teams brought me during the first week of transition. In the specific language she used in her client communications, direct, warm, never performative. In the way her staff spoke about her in those early meetings, present tense, slipping into past tense, and back again, the way it does when people have not yet finished the internal work of accepting a loss. I did not correct them. I understood. There was a morning in the 3rd week when I opened a folder and found a handwritten note she had left for herself. A reminder about a call she had intended to make, dated 6 weeks before the accident. I set the folder down. I waited. Then I picked it up again. I met with the financial teams. I met with the operational leads. I made my position clear to each of them in language that did not require repetition. Nothing was being dissolved, nothing redirected, nothing sold to resolve the convenience of anyone who had not built it. Mirabelle would inherit exactly what her mother had created. My job was to ensure it reached her intact and grown. They understood. Every one of them. On the last Friday of that month, I sat at Vashti's desk for the first time. On the desk, there was a photograph. The three of us at the farmhouse, taken on an afternoon I remembered well. Vashti was laughing at something I had said. Mirabelle was looking at her mother's face the way children look at the people they love most completely. I had not known someone was taking the picture. Neither had Vashti. That was why it was real. I looked at it for a long time. Then I opened the first file. I had work to do. I have thought about that laugh every day since. Not with shame, not with confusion. I understand it now in a way I did not in the moment it arrived. Understand it the way you understand things that happen faster than thought and truer than anything you could have constructed deliberately. Lavinia Morrow leaned over my daughter's casket and whispered about millions. And before I could find a single word, my granddaughter's voice rose from against my chest and told that woman, with the complete, unshakable certainty of a child who had been told her mother was at the farmhouse and had no reason to doubt it, that her mummy was not dead. Lavinia's face went pale, and I laughed, because my daughter was already gone, had been gone since that road, 11 miles from this farmhouse, on the drive home from the woman who loved her most, and gave her the worst possible advice from the best possible place. I told Vashti to stay. I told her to protect what she had built. And she drove back toward a life I told her to preserve, carrying everything she could not say out loud, and she never made it home. I laughed because somewhere inside that terrible moment was something my daughter herself would have recognized immediately. The cruel absurdity of it. A woman who had spent months calculating how to claim another woman's life being undone by a 5-year-old child who still believed her mother was waiting safely at a farmhouse. Vashti would have understood why that broke something open in me. She was not there to laugh at it herself. So I did. Here is where everyone is now. Lavinia Morrow's name sits permanently in a public criminal record, harassment and extortion, documented and attached to her for the remainder of whatever life she is building from what remains. The civil judgment follows her finances. The social world she cultivated inside my daughter's life is gone. She wanted millions. She received consequences. I find I have nothing further to say about her. Chadwick Langford comes on his visiting days. He is quieter than he used to be, smaller in the way that men become smaller when they have finally stopped managing the distance between who they are and who they told themselves they were. He is present for Mirabelle in the ways he is capable of being present. I do not interfere with that. I meant what I said in Raymond's office, and I have kept it. Mirabelle is 6 now. She asks questions that require real answers, and I give them to her as honestly as her age permits. She has her mother's brightness, that particular quality of attention that made people feel seen when Vashti turned it toward them. It appears in her daughter without effort or instruction. It simply lives there, and I am here. Older than I expected to be doing this. More tired than I show. Running a legacy that was never supposed to be mine to run and protecting it with everything I have left. It is an early spring afternoon. Mirabelle is in the back field, the same field her mother ran to every visit, the same field I have watched from this porch for 30 years. I am standing here with my tea going cold in both hands. I say Vashti's name quietly into the open air, not in grief, in conversation. I tell her Lavinia's name is in a court record. I tell her the money is safe and the businesses are running and Constance Webb is exactly as precise as she always was. I tell her the girl is safe. I tell her I braid her hair the same way every morning and it takes me a moment each time to find the rhythm, but I am getting faster. I tell her the farmhouse is still standing. I tell her she can rest now. From the back field, Mirabelle shouts something, a question or a name, or simply the noise children make when they are happy and have someone to aim it at. I call back. I set my tea down on the porch railing. I go inside to start dinner. The porch is empty. The field is full of sound.